Hi, I'm Reggie York, and this is a presentation on presenting a PowerPoint lecture. I am at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. The purpose of this presentation is to provide basic guidance on the effective PowerPoint presentation for those with little experience designing and presenting PowerPoint lectures. So this is really for the beginner. We'll cover a number of basic points that I think would be useful to you as you think about designing PowerPoints presentations and also presenting them orally to a particular audience. I'll offer several suggestions, and I'll try to illustrate those suggestions as well. There are two parts of this presentation. Part A is about designing the PowerPoint. Part B is about making the presentation to an audience when you have a PowerPoint. My first question to you is, where do you think you should start? Let's think about this. Should you start writing down the things you want to say right now? Let's say you haven't started yet. You haven't even put together a PowerPoint presentation yet. You're just thinking about it. So do you start writing down the things you want to say? Just write them down and make notes and start working on PowerPoint slides? Or determine the purpose of the presentation and who will be your audience. Which one? Well, I hope you agree with me that it's the second one, determine the purpose of the presentation. So what's next? Now, are you ready to start writing down the things you want to say? Or determine the scope of the presentation regarding things like how much to put in one presentation and what to leave for the next presentation. Well, of course, I hope you agree with me that it's the second one, determine the scope of the presentation. So let's summarize these beginning steps as you're thinking about designing the PowerPoint slides. Decide on the purpose, decide on the scope, decide on the audience. Let's apply those to this particular presentation about doing a PowerPoint presentation. The purpose, scope, and audience for this presentation. First of all, the purpose: to illustrate the fundamentals of designing and presenting the PowerPoint. Scope: we are dealing with the fundamentals, not advanced lessons. Audience: those with little training or experience. So this is going to be a relatively brief presentation, maybe 15 minutes. In regard to designing the PowerPoint, I want to say, first of all, keep your focus, determine the major purpose, and make this clear on your very first slide so the people who are reviewing it for you will know what you're doing. Next, organize your presentation into major themes and list the major themes first. As you go through the slides, keep the participant or help the participant to see where you are at all times. In other words, which theme are you on now? As you will notice at the top of this slide, you see the term designing the PowerPoint right over the words keep your focus. That tells you that where we are in this presentation is the first part, designing the PowerPoint. Let me make a few preliminary points. Keep your PowerPoint presentation manageable. You might say that less is more. Don't overwhelm the reviewer. Keep the individual slide to only a few points and present them one by one on the screen, as I'm doing here. Graphics are good, but should be kept simple. Do not present, when you're doing an oral presentation, do not present to the audience a complicated graph or a complicated table. They simply will not be able to follow that very well. They're out in an audience looking at a screen, and they're probably also listening to you. It'll be very confusing to those. When you're doing a big complicated table, you can do that if you're writing a book or a chapter in a book or an article, because the individual has the hard copy. They can spend whatever time they want looking at the complicated table and deciding what it all means. You'll notice as I've been doing this, I've been presenting points on the screen for you one at a time. I didn't put all three of these points up for you to review all at once and start talking about them. That would be okay, I suppose, providing that you make it clear that you're talking about the first one first, and the second one, and the third one. But I think it's even better for you to put it so that your points that you're making come up one by one, so that the reader or the audience is very clear about what point it is you are working on at the present time. Next, engage the participant. Should you design a PowerPoint presentation with all the content you wish to convey in your presentation listed in the PowerPoint slides? In other words, you don't plan to say anything beyond what is on the PowerPoint slides, the words on those slides. Should you do this, or should you elaborate? I think if you're not planning to elaborate on the points on the slides, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to have people listen to you, because why not just have them review your slides? Should the content on the slide present information in didactic fashion, or engage the participant with questions or examples related to it? Well, I suggest the latter is better. I've tried to do that a couple of times here, where I ask you to think about something that was designed to engage you, rather than strictly listening to me talk about the different points. Another thing is what to put on a slide, how much content to be on a single slide. Should the PowerPoint be designed for all content to appear at once, or one point at a time? I just actually made that comment in the previous slide. Do it as I'm doing it here, where we have one point coming up on the screen, then another point, then another, and so forth. Okay, now we're at part B, making the presentation. What are some tips for making the presentation? Think about that. You've probably had many experiences where you've heard someone present and you didn't think they did a very good job, because they probably overwhelmed you, they probably rambled, and generally left you confused. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, a few things to consider. First, I'll ask you a question. Can you expect participants to read the content of the slide at the same time you're talking? Well, that might be a little difficult, particularly if you throw a lot of things on the screen at one time and then start talking, particularly if you're bouncing around among the different points on the screen, talking about them in some kind of random order, and the audience is trying to figure out which one of these things you're talking about now. They're trying to read, trying to listen, going back and forth. That's not going to be good. Should you read the content on the slide? I just got through doing that. I've done that most of the time here. And I think that that's okay, because the points I have been making one by one on the screen have been relatively simple. So reading that content's probably okay. But I think if you, two different kinds of things you might consider, particularly if you're putting a fair amount of content on the screen at once. Let's say it's a quote from the Gettysburg Address or something of that nature, and it needs to be more than a sentence or two. It needs to be a paragraph there. You might want to just put that paragraph up on the screen, ask the reviewer to read it, and you be silent for 30 seconds or so while you give that person a chance to read. Then you start talking about it, making your point about that paragraph in the Gettysburg Address. Should you elaborate on the content on the slide? Of course. In fact, we've already covered that at least once previously. Here are a few more things to consider. That's the question: how do you keep your focus? Make sure that you train yourself to do that. How do you keep from mumbling or other bad habits? I have myself had problems with that the first time years ago when I started making presentations that were recorded. I realized I had a bit of a tendency to have my voice sort of tail off at the end, sometimes into a mumble. That was very disturbing when I first encountered that tendency of mine. So I've had to train myself, you might say, not to do that. More things you might consider: learn about the features of PowerPoint. This presentation is not about the features of PowerPoint. I'm assuming you know how to do a PowerPoint presentation technically. Practice, practice, practice. There is no substitute for experience. And keep in mind that what you have done with me here today is only the beginning. This is the end of my presentation. I hope this helped you, and good luck in doing your presentation.